Gonna take this. Hey, good evening, everybody. So for those online and live streaming, and then in our studio audience, we're gonna call this the studio audience too. So if you're here, come on up as far as you can, because it's rainy. It is amazing that you've made it through the weather as well. That is appreciated too. So we're gonna have an intimate meetup on probably one of my favorite topics in the world, with one of the best people, in my opinion, that knows how to talk about this topic in the world too. So for those folks who have who are online or will hear this streaming for years to come, this will change your world as well. And then Stephanie, later I want to talk about the NYC half. So excellent. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jeremy Shapiro, and between myself and Stella Lupashore, we're the co-leads of the New York HR Analytics Meetup. If you were not planning on talking about analytics, this might be the wrong room for you or stream to for you to look at. So tonight's topic is very special to me. So I have the privilege of running the HR analytics practice for Merck Pharmaceuticals, and as part of my responsibilities, there's a fair amount of presentation level work to the board, to senior executives, to be able to tell the story of what's going on to our employees, about what's going on in the organization, and it's not easy. It's not easy to do at all. So I'm personally excited for this group. If you're here, you're part of the studio audience because we are streaming as well, and so you'll make this as interactive as we can make it too. A couple of special thank yous. First is to Katie and OneModel for hosting tonight. As well, we appreciate you kind of coming up from New Jersey. I'm Jersey too, but you came in from Jersey to do it. I'm going to hand you the mic if that's okay, just for a second. Just tell us about you. And most of us, I'm sure, know OneModel, but just a couple words on them.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Spud. I am a sales director with OneModel, so appreciate y'all being here. We are a people analytics platform. We are known for building data pipelines. So if you are a practitioner or work in the field, you've probably spent a lot of time manipulating data manually. We solve that problem for our customers so that you can spend more time doing the fun visualization work and helping people use data to make decisions. I've been at the company for a couple of years now. I've been in SaaS for a long time. I have 2 prizes to give away. So if you are sitting in a chair in the second row, you get one of these. I think it's you guys have to find. All yours. If you look under that chair, there's a business card. Yeah. And I think you might actually be in the other chair. You can okay, you guys can decide who gets it.
They don't know what it is.
Yeah, open it for the audience.
Is it one of those snaky things?
It is not, but that would have been really fun. We want data to be heard. We want it to be clear and accurate. It's a really nice speaker, so enjoy that.
Nice.
And then I believe are in the other chair where I put my business card underneath. If you look, you'll find it. A fun Stanley, because who doesn't want to stay hydrated, especially if he's getting cold in the winter. So we don't specialize in music and speakers. We really focus on data. So if you're interested in seeing a demo, if you haven't seen the product, please reach out. I'd love to share it with you, get your feedback. We aren't the best at the visualization piece. We're the sandwiches on the ends, but if you need data pipeline work, that's our bread and butter. So thank you so much. Enjoy the night tonight.
Yes. Thanks, Katie. Thanks for everyone online too. Also, you can't see this online. We are at NYU, which is the first time in a long time. Years ago, we were at NYU as well. So thank you, Anna, for opening up your program in this fantastic space as well too. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about or kind of mention on the program for anyone who's not familiar? I think half of us would be, but anything that you want to just mention about the programs that you're working on now?
Yeah, thank you so much. We're recruiting a faculty in our HR program, which is now beginning, is turning to be more analytics and technology focused. I think this is how we differentiate ourselves from
Mhm.
all our programs. We're recruiting for faculty who's going to be current on HR technology and specializing in that area. And that's how we're going to continue to position ourselves. And we're always looking for adjunct faculty who's specializing in certain areas of our field and interested in developing additional skill sets and teaching. We'd always like to have people from the trenches of where it's happening here and to share with our students. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you for hosting as well. So, we're gonna bring up Alex Velez from Storytelling with Data, and I would just, so this is my informal introduction for you. You please introduce yourself, but I'm a giant fan of Storytelling with Data. I think I have purchased for friends just on my own dime, probably about 30 copies of Storytelling with Data for them. Like, if someone ever struggles with, I'm not quite sure what to do, just go get the book. And I say, don't get the online book, get the actual book so that you can see, like, you need to see the before and after ideas. Then you actually wrote a book called Before and After, but you have to actually like see it in person, like to really understand how to tell stories like this as well. But in my view, and it's hopefully a professional opinion, of the folks that have done Storytelling with Data, this is not an HR topic. This is a topic that is for everyone. I think you guys have nailed it. To have sat through week-long trainings on these things of other companies, and by far you did the best job of this as well. So she didn't know I was going to say that. She had no idea. I got to meet Cole like 15 years ago before any of this was published. As well. And as soon as she started presenting, I'm like, yeah, that's probably what it is. Now, there is an evil thread that is not as well known, but Cole kind of does talk about it. So Cole is the person who founded Storytelling with Data. She actually, she first started in JP Morgan risk management, but then she went to Google People Analytics.
Yes.
And then she created Storytelling with Data. So if you notice in a lot of the examples on both on the website, in your books as well, there's a lot of HR stories. One, they're kind of universal, so it makes sense, but it's also because that's the work that she did in other places.
A lot of HR clients.
Yeah, when we need it, we need it too. So with that, we're going to hand the mic over. You're gonna kind of show us some of the great work that you're doing now, and please teach us about you. And in the audience, both online and in person, ask questions. And we're so happy that you were able to kind of sneak us into your schedule.
All right, thank you. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I am not in the HR space, although I've partnered with a number of HR professionals to help them communicate their data quite a bit. So my background is actually in data, specifically statistics. And I learned very early in my career, garbage in meant garbage out. So I transitioned my career pretty quickly into data engineering, where I got a good grasp of data wrangling. And from there, I decided I would go back into front-end analytics, right? Business intelligence type roles. And it's throughout all of these different quantitative roles that I started to realize those that were the most successful were actually not the most technical, but rather it were the ones that were really good communicators. And I witnessed this time and time again in different organizations and different roles. Took me quite a bit of time to recognize that within myself, which is sort of ironic when I think about it, because I had learned this lesson a very long time ago in a space completely unrelated to data. So I'm going to take you back, I don't know, about 15 years ago. I woke up one morning and I had a brilliant idea. I was going to become a dance fitness instructor. Didn't see that coming, did you? Now, just to tell you a little bit about myself, at that point in time in my life, I used to hit the gym multiple times a day. Also, somebody who's been blessed with a little bit of rhythm, right? I can dance. All of the technical skills for me to be good at this, they were there. But I was not. Had to learn the hard way that if I wanted people to come to my class, if I wanted them to come back, I had to use music that was their preference, right? Not my own personal taste. I had to use moves that were simple for them to pick up, not try and show off my own skill. This audience perspective, it did not just serve me in my very short-lived dance fitness career, but rather when I brought this mindset shift into my analytical work, that's when I started to see success. Realized that if I wanted my CEO to pay attention to my complex analysis, I had to communicate it in a way that was simple for them, but also relevant, helped them make a smarter decision. So it turns out that communicating with data is actually incredibly simple, and it's something that every single professional can learn how to do and can benefit from. And so I transitioned my career about 7 years ago to joining the Storytelling with Data team. I actually just started teaching in this space as well. So I'm currently teaching a data storytelling class down at UVA Durden, which I will immediately hop on the flight after this to go teach the class tomorrow. And I have just come to learn that this is such an exciting topic, right? Everybody can benefit from it. So usually I spend my time teaching best practices for data storytelling. Today, we're going to flip that around. We're actually going to focus on the common mistakes that most people make, because it turns out that there's a lot that we can learn when you do something wrong. So more specifically, we'll focus on the 5 common mistakes that I often see folks make. And we'll do this via example. So the first example that we're going to look at is this beautiful gem that you see on the screen here. Now, it's a little tough to see from far back, but just at quick glance, how does a slide like this make you feel? Let me know. You feel free to shout it out.
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed? What other thoughts come to mind?
Disinterested.
Disinterested? Yeah, it's kind of
Where's the legend?
Microsoft sucks.
Microsoft sucks. I like it. So I'll just point out that in all of these reactions, these are not positive reactions, right? This is certainly not how we want our audience to feel. Now, when I look at this slide, I see 5 common mistakes that I see pretty much every single business professional make at some point. So I want to cycle through these 5 mistakes. So one of the first challenges is that we are trying to do too much with a single graph. Right? I can totally understand the desire to want to be efficient, pack all the data into a single view, but we actually make it harder for our audience when we do this. I also see challenges with the chart type that we are using. So we're not necessarily using an appropriate chart choice for our underlying data and our message, so we can fix that. We're not spending time improving the actual graph structure, but just relying on whatever our tools spit out by default. In this case, we may have guessed it might be Microsoft Excel in this case. I also see some challenges with the use of color, so not using color as strategically as we could. And then one of the biggest problems I see is that we are using slides for multiple purposes, right? You can imagine a slide like this with quite a bit of text is probably used as a pre-read to send around, but also presented to a particular audience. So let's focus on each one of these issues in turn, and we will slowly make this example much, much, much easier to process and also hopefully a little more compelling for us. So we're going to start with that first issue of packing too much data into a single graph. As I mentioned, it's understandable why people do this. They're trying to be efficient with their use of space. The more that we put into a single view probably means that the less time we have to talk to our audience, right? It's all there. They can answer any single question that they might have. But we do our audiences a disservice because we tend to make things a lot more complicated than they need to be. So let's start to focus on this individual graph, and I'm going to move a little closer to the slide here. And when I start to take in this graph, and you can read the title, it says RAF total accounts and top 3 channels. Probably wondering to yourself, what does RAF stand for? That's the first challenge that we have. Stands for refer a friend accounts. So this graph comes from a streaming service where they're tracking the number of accounts that are come to them because somebody else has referred their friend. And they're seeing how things have changed over time. So as I look at this graph, I start to notice that there's 2 main stories here. Right? We have the total, this is this black bar over time, but then we're also trying to give our audience a sense of the compositional view. Where do these accounts actually come from? Are they coming from email, the web, or just simply organic traffic? So there's 2 distinct stories here, that total story and the compositional story. Why not just use 2 distinct charts? So we could split this up. Maybe we start with that total story and we just put that data into a single view. You can imagine if I were presenting this, now I could start to talk about how something happened in 2022, the accounts spiked, they've stayed high, but something recently has changed that has caused them to come down in the latest year of data. Then I could transition to that compositional story where I can start to talk about how the majority of these accounts seem to be coming from email. That's the strongest channel. But then when we focus on web, which is actually the second stack here, we can start to see that it was relatively small, but there was some sort of spike that also happened in 2022, where more accounts are being generated from our web traffic. These are insights that would have been incredibly challenging to see when we packed it into a single view. But actually, as we start to split things out, we can start to focus on the data a little bit more, right, and get more nuanced. So there's a common saying, less is more. I think it applies here in this case, where less at one time is more clear for your particular audience. And actually, because we have separate charts here, now we give ourselves flexibility that we can use a more intuitive view that will resonate with our audience. So that makes us, or moves us into the second mistake that we can start to address, which is just making sure that we are always using an appropriate chart type, not an inappropriate one. Now notice my language. I say an appropriate chart type. A lot of times people believe that there's this perfect chart type out there for your data set. It's not true. There's no such thing as a one-to-one relationship between a data set and a chart type, but rather many different charts can be used for any sort of data. So your goal is just to find one that will resonate with your audience. And when you're communicating data, believe it or not, simple charts work best. I'm talking bar charts, basic line charts. That's because when you put something simple in front of your audience, they don't have to spend mental energy trying to figure out, well, how do I even read this before they get to that insight? So keep it simple. It's probably the best tip that I can offer you. So let's start to focus on these chart types. Here we have a standard vertical bar chart, also known as a column chart, and then we have a vertical stacked bar chart. Do you think these are the right chart types to use for this data? You see heads shaking no. Any ideas for what else we could use? No wrong answers here.
Can we just combine them into one, like with different colors? And rather than showing total, the 3 bars would eventually show like its total.
Yeah. So right now we're only showing the top 3 channels, but if we aim for completeness and show the other stack, we could just get one chart in this case and have a complete stacked bar chart rather than splitting it up. That's one option. What else could we do?
Well, it is time.
Oh,
Time does suggest a specific type of line.
yeah, trends. Yeah, I see people in the back sort of orchestrating there. Yeah, so a line chart could work well. I actually think that's a fantastic choice. And so if I focus in on this first graph here, and we just start to experiment with different chart types in this case, I think lines would be the ideal way to show the trend over time. In fact, if we go back to these bars, notice how your eyes basically just focus on the end points of these bars, and then you're comparing them across. If that's what we want the audience to do, a line helps facilitate that, right? It tells our audience we want them to be scanning horizontally. Now, if we transition to this stacked bar chart, we're no longer beholden to showing quantity on the vertical axis because we've split things up. In fact, if we go back to the original slide, and I recognize that I only showed it for a second and the text is quite tiny, but in these bullets, somebody is trying to communicate the proportion of total, right? The percent of accounts that came from email, the percent of accounts that came from organic traffic. So we're just trying to show proportions. That's actually pretty hard to do in the stacked bar chart because we have to start to estimate how much of total bars, when they're all changing in sizes, it actually is. So if that's the case, and that's what we're trying to communicate, slight twist on this graph would be to create a 100% stacked bar chart, where now our vertical axis goes all the way up to 100%. And as we had with the idea, we could make it complete by just adding in that 4th category that sums all the way to 100%. And now we can start to see some interesting insights that maybe we didn't see before, like the fact that email as a percent of total is actually declining over time and web is increasing. That leads us to the third mistake that we always want to try to avoid, which is to simply ignore the graph structure. Now, when I say graph structure, I'm really referring to everything on these charts that doesn't have anything to do with data. So I'm actually going to take away the data. This is the graph structure. We've got borders, grid lines, axes, legends. Oftentimes when we're visualizing our data, we just trust our tools way too much. We rely on their default settings, but our tools don't always know what's going to be best and most intuitive for our audience. So take the time to go beyond the default settings and create a graph structure that really supports and frames your data. Now, when you look at this graph structure, is there anything that you would recommend removing or changing?
I usually don't use the graph, I just add the values. So it's, I mean, but that's my way of doing it.
No, you're not wrong. So I believe what you're saying is instead of relying on the vertical axis, you would just label the data directly.
It's more clean for me, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying. You're not using both. It's one versus the other. Because you can imagine if we had all of the labels, it'd be pretty repetitive with that vertical axis, and the vertical axis would almost become useless. What else could we do to maybe make that look a little bit cleaner?
Remove the border.
We could remove the border. I love that.
Remove the decimals.
Yeah,
Mm.
got a bunch of trailing zeros, adding absolutely no informative value here, right? So we could round them off, make it simpler.
Change the date format on the.
Ah, great idea. So we have some really verbose ways of telling us the year, right? We've got the day, the month, and then that 2-year digit. It's also diagonally rotated, which means we have to stretch a little bit just to be able to read it. So let's cycle through how we can improve this. One of the first things I'll do is remove borders and grid lines. I do this probably 99% of the time when I'm formatting a chart. I think sometimes we think we need to have a border, but it turns out we know that all of these elements belong to the same chart, right? We know it's complete even without it. Then we can draw our attention to the framing, what I consider the vertical and the horizontal axis. I love this idea of rounding those numbers, right? Getting rid of those zeros. I think we could also make it more intuitive for our audience by titling these axes. That way our audience doesn't have to guess, well, what sort of metrics are we actually plotting? Now, sure, they could read the title, they could maybe look at any context on the slide and try to figure it out, but why make our audience do extra work when we could just simply title it and make it more intuitive for them? We'll also address the diagonal dates along our horizontal axis. A study has shown that diagonally rotated text just 45 degrees is actually 50% slower to read than horizontally oriented text. So in the spirit of making things simpler for our audience, let's use horizontal text whenever possible. And one way that we can do this is just by using the yearly labels, right? We don't need to have such a long format date on this. So let's go ahead and change our horizontal and our vertical axes. That all looks like this. Another change that I will make is to address the title. Notice how attention grabbing it is. It's bold and it's in this bright blue purple color. We also probably all already forgot what RAF stands for. So one of the tricks that we can do is we can actually left align our title. So use the entire space above the graph, and that'll let us spell it out so our audience doesn't have to guess. And because it's at the top, we actually don't need such a bold font and a bright color to draw attention to the title. We can just take advantage of its prominent location on the graph. So that change could look something like this, a little bit more intuitive for an audience who's looking at it for the first time. And the final change I will make to the graph structure has to do with these legends. Legends are added by default by almost every single tool. I try not to use them. Now in this first graph, we don't really need a legend. We only have a single series. It's implied based on the title, so we could get rid of it. For the legend on our second graph, it's actually not very easy to use. We have similar shades of purple, which means that we're trying to guess which stack goes with which one. So in this case, I'm going to do something that's probably going to look a little bit weird, but I'm going to move that legend to the right-hand side where I'm going to label the data directly. Now, it looks a little strange without data, but when I add this in, notice how much easier it is to understand which stack and which label are paired together because of their closeness in proximity. Notice how as you look at this, the frame, the structure, no longer competes for attention with the data, but rather it supports it and allows an audience who's looking at this graph for the first time to really understand what they're looking at. Let's move on to our fourth mistake, which is simply underestimating the power of color. Now, in my opinion, color is one of the most powerful tools you have for formatting a graph. So if you only take away one thing from this talk, let it be to use color intentionally, not to just use it to make your graph feel pretty or to simply categorize your data, but rather to focus attention on where your audience should look within your graph. So color has a lot of superpowers. One is that it can focus our attention. Two is that it can set the tone for how we could feel about our data, but it also can determine whether or not our graphs are accessible. So we're going to cycle through each one of these superpowers. But just to help you understand the power of color, we'll do a little thought exercise here. Where in a moment, I'm going to put the first graph up, and I just want you to tell me, where do your eyes go first? So where do you look first in this line chart?
Line.
Where within the line?
Line.
Sort of the spike?
Mhm.
Yeah. So because we don't have anything drawing our attention, we're sort of left to focus on the shape. It's not surprising that something sticking up would catch our attention. We also typically process a page in the top left corner going in these zigzag motions. So if it's higher up on the graph, it'll certainly grab our attention. But notice if I showed you the same graph, but I changed the color to red, probably start looking at the most recent data. Color can help focus our attention. And the other thing that we want to be aware of is that anytime we use something like red or orange that tends to be pretty alarming, we often associate it with danger, concern, right? So the fact that we have this line segment that is colored differently moving downwards, all of a sudden we're focusing there and we're a little fearful for what's going on with the data. I didn't tell you how to feel about the data. That's just conveyed to you subconsciously based on your use of color, which tells you how powerful color can be. Now, you don't necessarily have to just use different hues of color. So in this case, I'm using bright red or bright orange is kind of how it's appearing in the resolution of this screen. I could also play with different components of color, characteristics. So for instance, I could play with saturation, or maybe if I want to use black, a more neutral color, I could just use black to focus on the more recent data and push everything else in that line to the background by using gray. Again, if we were to do that quick test of where do you look first, my guess is now you're focusing specifically on the more recent data. So let's shift to the second graph in this communication. And I'm curious, what do you think of these colors? Are they effective, not effective?
Not loving it.
Not loving it. You want to elaborate?
Well, one, if you happen to be colorblind, that is absolutely, that's gonna be a really big problem in itself. But if you're looking for discrete colors, they're in very similar palettes. And so
Yeah,
there's very little, my eye's gonna go everywhere.
exactly. So we have a couple of issues. There's a lot of color going on, so we're not necessarily sure where to look. We have similar shades of a color, which might make us start to think that these categories are related in some way, when in fact they are distinct, discrete categories, separate channels. We're not necessarily communicating that. And they sort of run into one another. So we have some accessibility concerns. Now, one of the challenges that you might face when you start to think about colors for visualization is that the colors you want to use don't necessarily align with your company palette. That's the challenge in this case. So these are the colors for this particular company. They're all very similar. So we now start to understand where these colors came from. Now, that said, we could still be more thoughtful with the selection based on the specific palette. And we could try to choose colors that are as distinct as possible. So in this case, I might choose the brighter blue, one of the teals, and maybe the purple. And I also could use some of these neutral colors in terms of gray. That might look something like this. A little bit easier to take in, even though we are constrained. Now, I also did something important here. For the border of these stacks, instead of choosing the same color as the fill of these stacks, decided to outline it in white just to create a little bit of visual separation, knowing that these colors are very similar. So just making sure that the graph is still accessible, even if those colors start to run into one another. This leads us to the fifth mistake that I want you to be wary of, which is making sure that you are not just creating one version of your slides. Now, why does this happen? How do we create slides like this? Oftentimes when we present in business, somebody raises their hand at the end and they say, do you mind sending me your slides? Or they send you an email and they say, can you send me your slides before the meeting tomorrow? So you start to design slides that fit both places. The name for this is a slidument, part document, part slide. Start to add some words onto the slide, but we want it to be scannable, so we don't use enough words that this really makes sense to anyone who's consuming it independently. But then we want it to be visual, so we start adding in some graphics, maybe some clip art and some pictures, and the next thing you know, we have a document that doesn't serve any one of those purposes. So my recommendation is don't do that, right? Create slides that serve each individual environment. Start to recognize that your tolerance for details when you're sitting in a room consuming a presentation is much lower than when you're at your desk, got your beverage in hand and you're reading a document. So when you are designing something to be consumed independently, you need a lot more detail for it to truly be able to stand on its own, a lot more text on the page. When you're designing something to be presented, you want to make sure that it's not too busy because you actually want your audience's attention on you, and you don't want your slides to compete for attention with you. So let's start first with how we might redesign this slide if we're going to send it around and somebody has to consume it independently on their desk without me there to actually talk through it. One of the first things I will start to do is recognize how I use words and graphics. So if we think back to some of the graphs that we've already designed, we've split it into two, which means we have two graphs. How are we going to fit that on this specific slide? Well, we can take advantage of the landscape mode, right, the wide screen of a slide, and we can start to split it in half. And we can rearrange the text so that the bullets that pertain to the total story are right near that particular data, and the bullets that talk about the channel attribution are right near the relevant graph. Now, one of the things that I personally can't stand, it's a bit of my pet peeve, is when I see bullets in a document. I totally understand why they're there, to make things more scannable, but if it's not actually a list and it's something that somebody needs to understand, this creates more work for somebody else. They have to take these disjointed thoughts and try to connect it into their head about what somebody's actually trying to convey. A couple of complete, well-structured sentences can communicate a lot more than an entire bulleted list. So I highly recommend using complete sentences instead of bullets. And that might look something like this, where we can add super category headers at the top, make it a little bit more scannable. We can use similar colors as the graphic itself. We can take advantage of the fact that we got rid of those grid lines, add some annotations and some data labels directly on the graph, so that if somebody who is scanning this slide has a sense of how to connect the words to the graph if they want a little bit more detail. Now, if I were presenting, this is entirely too much information to be showing. In fact, it's quite risky for me to put this up because some of you are starting to read instead of pay attention to me. So if we are going to present, we want to split this across multiple slides. We want to reveal every single individual point and takeaway one piece at a time so that our audience is really focusing on us. They're not trying to process the graph in the background while listening to us. We can't actually do that very well. So I want to give you a sense of what that might look like. Let's imagine that I was asked to share this specific data at an upcoming quarterly business review. Only got a few minutes in between plenty of other people who are going to be presenting on their specific departments. My update might look and sound something like this. So welcome everyone. Today I want to give you a quick update on how our Refer a Friend program is doing. Now, some of you are new to the organization, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time just giving you some background on the Refer a Friend program, and then we'll focus on more recent data. So Refer a Friend is basically a new acquisition tool for us. It's how we get some new business and some new customers. Existing customers are allowed to refer their friends and family, and in return, they get some sort of incentive from us. Now, this tool has been around for a few years. In fact, back in 2019 through 2021, it had started to plateau right between 250,000 and 300,000 accounts. So we started to think to ourselves, how could we make this program stronger? And we decided to incentivize our customers. We introduced a $25 Visa gift card for every person that they referred to join our streaming service. And as a result, we saw the amount of refer a friend accounts spike, increased approximately 48%. Now, we further optimized our program by starting to play around in an A/B test where we would put our web placements for the Refer a Friend program. All of these changes combined meant that in 2023, we actually hit a record high. But this is also when we started to notice some challenges, started to realize that people were referring multiple people over and over again. We were starting to get fake referrals. So we decided to create more strict guidelines. So the eligibility criteria got much, much stronger. And as a result, we knew that going into 2024, we would expect a lower amount of Refer a Friend accounts. Set a goal of approximately 420,000, and I'm happy to report that midway through the year, we have already surpassed that at 435 accounts. So what that tells us is that our Refer a Friend program is incredibly strong and resilient despite the stronger eligibility criteria. Now, to give you a sense of where we are marketing the Refer a Friend program, there are 3 main channels: email, web, and organic. Email accounts for most of the referral friend accounts. So these are just regular emails that we are sending to our customers, reminding them of the incentives. In fact, across the last 6 years, it averages out to be about 58% of total Refer a Friend accounts. Web is a channel that we've had for a while, but we just weren't doing it as well. So you can see this increase that took place in 2022. That's when we started to play around with placements. We started to A/B test some of our copy and our ads, and we saw web traffic start to become a nice big contributor for that Refer a Friend program. Organic is small and it's tiny, but it doesn't really matter. It's not something that we spend a lot of time on, and we still get some traffic through. All of this to say is that the Refer a Friend program is an incredibly strong acquisition tool, and we should continue doing what we're doing so that we can hopefully continue to grow our customer base. So my update could look and sound something like that. And you'll notice same story, same graphics, 2 very different versions. Now, I'm not recommending that you spend time creating different graphics or creating different stories for those environments, just modifying the way in which you share it with your audience so that you can best meet them where they are in that specific time. Questions or thoughts? This one usually gets people.
I have a couple questions. Could you go back a couple to this is perfect. Can we use this as a jumping off point and I put water behind you in case you need it?
Yeah. I was actually about to grab my bowl.
Okay, good. I was here and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I know I get caught in a lot is when you show a trend like this. So if I take a look at, let's say, the web trend,
Yeah.
right? It's going from 2019 to 2024 year to date, that's widening.
Yes.
Now, the context behind what's driving, so in reading some of your captions,
Yes.
describe the pattern itself.
Mm-hmm.
And what I notice, I'll do this for the so okay. Hello, web people. Okay, so what I do notice is that sometimes, and I don't know if anyone else feels this way too, is you provide the context that exists, but maybe not the context that they need to understand. So you can imagine that this marketing team doubled their budget for email between 2019 and 2024, and it's now a lower proportion of their Refer a Friend, and web has turned out to be a larger proportion. You can imagine that conversation being rather depressing, right? Because they've actually doubled their budget for using the channel that's actually becoming less effective over time, and then now they need to reconsider what's going on. Or so there are times when if I switch the context
Yes.
to an externalized fact, that kind of it just amplifies the conversation and allows us to say, hey, given that we've doubled our budget in this time period, do we have the right mix? How are we thinking about this? So depending on the conversation that I want to have, it might actually change this. But how do you think about kind of advice for all of us in terms of anticipating the conversation you want to have and
Yeah.
then providing visual context against that
You
conversation.
bring up a fantastic point. So one of the things that we focused on here mostly is visualizing data, but that's just one part of communicating data. The bigger part of that is actually forming your story. And to form a story, you have to know your audience, right? You have to know what matters to them, what they care about. And so the first step in all of this is actually taking a step back. It's not working with data at all. And it's starting to ask very simple questions of who exactly is on the receiving end, what motivates them, what are you going to ask them to do, and then how can you use data to do that? And I'm sure you know, because you've purchased like 40 copies of the book, but the entire first chapter goes through strategies specifically to crafting that specific narrative for your audience. So to answer the question, it's your job as the analyst to start to anticipate what your audience needs. And one of the things that I like to do sometimes before I'm going to get in front of a particular audience, especially if it's a discerning one, is grab a colleague. Sometimes if I don't have that, I'll play it myself and start to ask myself, where are things going to go wrong? What are the questions that I think they're going to ask? And I can use that as a way to prepare for when things go off the rails or what specific context I want to provide.
Yeah, that's fantastic. If I can offer one thought is while I was the person that said Microsoft not so great a few minutes ago.
I think we are.
I will compliment them in a different way. So if you happen to have Copilot enabled, you can ask Copilot to read the presentation, act like an executive, and point out the holes, right? So you're an executive at a major retail firm, you're concerned about margins here, read
Yes.
this deck, what are the 9 questions you would ask? And we've used this as a way to strengthen the
Yeah.
storytelling component as well. It actually works very, I'd rather a human look at it, but when they don't have that, Copilot's pretty quick.
Absolutely. I think AI as a brainstorming component or just a peer when you don't have somebody around you, especially now that many of us work in a hybrid capacity, works fantastic. And the key part that you said there is the prompt, right? So making sure that you're prompting it thoughtfully. So I'm an analyst, I'm trying to communicate this. I want you to anticipate where things might go wrong. And that's where you get some really good advice there. Yeah.
I want to take it in a little bit different direction.
Sure.
Because there were a lot of assumptions communicated to us through this presentation.
Sure.
And that is the assumptions around the visual system and how humans, because you said we see it this way with a lot of certainty, and obviously
That's fair.
looking at neuroscience and again the diversity of different visual systems, etc. Certainly humans prefer to see data maybe a certain way. And my question is, where are the data coming from that identifies the optimal design for presentation?
Yeah.
Because clearly there are multiple, and you suggested that there could be multiple designs, and I think that's the creative part
Yes.
of can you find, this is probably the optimal,
Yes.
but you also want to, in some presentations, want to break out of the kind of the routine tested, co-pilot tested presentation and
Sure.
do something different that with the intention of draw a different type of conclusion or move decisions in a different direction because you were able to communicate it different. So the question is around where do we get the data? And I assume you have it. I haven't heard the book yet.
Yeah.
On how are we perceiving this as, mammals?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So there was a lot of generalization in there, sure,
yeah.
of course. So one of the things that I will say when it comes to data visualization, and you already started to allude to this, it's just as much an art as it is a science, right? So we have studies in cognitive science, right, that start to help us understand, reading in a certain direction, colors that we see, but we're also human and we interpret things differently. And there's a cultural aspect to it, right?
Yes.
Talked about color, where red might be alarming. That's in Western cultures. In Eastern cultures, red might mean something is great and good. And so it's the exact inverse. And so that's why everything you do You have to start to recognize that you can't view it through the lens of you. So every time you design a graph or you choose a different color, there's advantages to seeing if you can get in front of your audience before you present it to say, how do you interpret this? What do you see? Because I may have called out, now we're looking at the most recent data, and some of you in the audience may have been like, well, I was looking at a different part. And there are different things that would have influenced that, but probably generally speaking, many of us were focusing on that area. So it's a bit of using your best judgment. And to your point, there are times where we break the rules. We absolutely want to do that. A great use case for breaking rules in data visualization is when you're communicating to the public. Right? Basic bars like this work fantastic in a business setting because the focus is on the message and you typically already have the captive audience. But when you're communicating on social media or in the public, your goal is actually engagement, right? You have to get somebody's attention. So bars are probably scroll right past that. We're going to do something a little bit different. An example I often give that everybody can relate to is the flatten the curve graphic from the pandemic, right? That was an area chart, didn't have any labels on it or anything of that nature, but because it was so simple and because it looked really slick with the bright red and the blue, and it just talked about shapes and trends, it worked really well for a public communication. That wouldn't be how you would communicate that to a scientific audience where you're trying to explain why we need to make some policy changes there. So there's always going to be different influences and factors. And there's actually no such thing as the right way. Your goal is to use your best judgment. And that's where the communication art aspect comes in. But there are certainly studies behind cognitive science that support this. Usually the place that I will point people to is the Visual Thinking Lab at Northwestern. I think they do a really good job on supporting some of the declutter, the focus, and the color techniques that I just shared there.
So one more question.
Yeah.
Around AI. If we are gonna use, based on Jeremy's advice, the co-pilot to get us to this point, where do you see the future of storytelling with data?
I think that's it. Is it still on? Yeah. I think that's something that people are really starting to figure out. So my viewpoint on AI is that it is a great brainstorming tool for us. At this point, when it comes to crafting a story that's going to resonate with your particular audience, it's not quite there yet, right? Because you have to know your business. You have to know that person. You have to know what their specific goals are. And so I think that where we use AI is more as a complement to us as humans, where we bring the storytelling, creative design aspect, and AI can help us in things like brainstorming where things go wrong, or, hey, I have this data set, I'm not quite sure how to show it. Can you give me different options that might work? But I still think we have to be responsible for the outcome of it. And we've tested a couple of things with visualization when it comes to AI. Actually, one of the chapters in this book, I did a makeover for it, and I sort of tested myself against AI, and I said, here's the slide, here are the prompts, here are the things that the person is trying to do. You redesign it. The results were wild and highly inaccurate. There was a map of Pennsylvania in mine. It showed a completely different country when it redid it. So I think you have to be careful. And I don't quite think AI is there yet on the visual aspect, but I think it's going to get there. And you're starting to see more data visualization people being brought into the AI design space. But until that happens, I still think this part is human skill set.
Alex, can I make a comment?
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting question. One of the things we're building, we have live in our product right now that's not general availability, but like in beta, is the bot will create the visualization for you if you tell it what you want. So I think what we're learning here tonight about how to interpret, how to actually tell the story is going to be the key for your future in communicating and making sure you're growing your career. Creating the visualization that is being done by like any analytics platform that you're going to use. Like at some point, if you're not using a co-pilot or an enterprise license, or you don't have it through school, like that's happening right now. So the interpretation and how do you direct people's attention, I think that's what's going to lag the most. But all of the capability to build the chart, it is happening. So you don't have to think about that. Give me a different chart. Those little prompts to like troubleshoot through it. that's like check the box, that's all.
And it could be the quality of the prompt that you're providing. right?
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
exactly where the nuance is gonna be most important. So creating a bar chart that's pumpkin spice theme and communicates this, like I can show you that in my product right now. But you being able to communicate the story and anyone sharing, right, the public versus the private, understanding your audience and then interpreting from them and using the bot to think, what questions are they gonna ask that I didn't already think about it? Like Alex is saying, using that as a troubleshooting tool. I think that's gonna be the key that keeps us employed and empowered and connected and effective at communicating with data, but actually creating some of it, that's being automated. So.
Cool.
Yeah, and so the key is for us to also understand enough that we can create the thoughtful prompt, right? You have to know enough about which chart type to use and why it's going to be good and why one color works better than the other to actually instruct somebody else to do it. So there's still a need for this skill set. I laugh because this was a theme in a class that we were just talking about. Do we need to learn this skill set or should this class go away? And one of the assignments that I had students do is they picked any sort of data set that they found online that was ripe for improvement. And I challenged them to improve it based on their skills from the class versus AI. And it was interesting that I think I did the math. It was 91% said that they still need the skill set to be able to prompt the tool for it. But they can see the efficiency gains in terms of they don't have to spend as much time formatting certain things or designing the actual chart. So I think together, humans and AI will make it there. But it's not replacing our ability to communicate with data. It's enhancing it. Good question. What are we at time check wise?
So we
5
are,
minutes.
yeah,
Do we have time for one more example?
sure, yeah.
All right, so I thought it would be fun. We'll go forward. I should mention the example that we looked at is from our newest book at Storytelling with Data, Before and After. I have a couple copies here that we will give away. And actually today is an incredibly special day in Storytelling with Data because it is actually the 10-year anniversary of that first white book. And so as a result, we created a hardcover version that I will also be giving away today. And so in spirit of the books, before we do the giveaway, that we'd look at one more makeover from the book, and this one lands in the HR analytics space. So you all have handouts in front of you. I thought it would be a little easier if we could look at it. I want you to spend just a few moments thinking through, based on what you've just witnessed, what you've talked about, what could you do to improve this communication? So imagine just somebody put a slide in front of you with these 4 graphs. How does this make you feel?
Makes me feel like I need to talk to my analyst.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed again, yeah. HR is one of those interesting places because you're often pulling data from multiple sources to tell a comprehensive story where sometimes the data doesn't always line up perfectly. It might look a little different graph to graph.
Yeah, we can do better with the values. They're overlapping and this is terrible.
Yeah, it's almost
Or-
impossible to tell, but there's labels on this first one that can't see because it's over top of the blue.
Yeah, either we can change the font color or have it on top.
Yeah, we could add some more contrast there. So there's probably some structural changes based on what we talked about that we could improve. Any other mistakes you're noticing?
No value, for the blue, sales manager admission per month, by month. The only values for the purple,
Yeah, for voluntary.
I'm trading that.
With that in mind too, we have at least 2 time-based charts that are bars, vertical bars.
Great eye. So we actually have the same type of data being shown in all 4 graphs in different ways. We've got it shown categorically through bars, and we've got it shown continuously through a line chart. This is a lot of cognitive burden on the audience, right? To start to recognize that this is the same trends over time, but because we show it so much differently, it feels like it's separate metrics that you have to figure out when it's really just different categories over time. Other thoughts?
The top right, for hires, it's looking more like a quarterly trend, so maybe monthly doesn't make sense, maybe quarterly. Sense.
Interesting spot. Yeah, there's definitely a seasonal pattern here that we can see that we don't have the context to understand yet. This just feels like a lot to understand, right? You can imagine if somebody were trying to present this and their goal was to give you an update on whether sales managers have increased or decreased over the course of the year, would you be able to figure it out? You have to do a lot of math, adding in numbers, a lot of questions and assumptions have to be made. So I noticed a lot of the same mistakes that we saw in the previous version in terms of we're probably not using the right charts. We should deviate from some of the default settings of our tool and start to improve the graph structure. So I could make some of those changes, right? I could get rid of the borders, the grid lines, be more thoughtful with labels, use consistent graph types where possible, so our audience doesn't have to rethink and reset every single time. This helps. It's definitely lighter than where we were. But one of the interesting things about this particular example is if we think about the first common mistake I said, right? So packing too much into a single view. We can apply that here where we're almost packing too much into a single slide and we'd be better served focusing on each aspect in turn. But we'd also probably be better served by taking all of these disparate pieces and combining them in some way to help our audience understand the big picture. And so a chart type that can sometimes be helpful in the HR analytics space is something known as a waterfall chart. Show of hands here, how many of you know what this is? Couple of hands, which is fantastic. This is usually a chart that can throw people for a bit, but I highly recommend using these quite a bit, especially when you are talking about head counts over time. Waterfall chart is sort of like a math problem visualized, where we can see what was the head count at the start of the year. We can see all of the additions that increased that head count. Then we can see the subtractions or the deductions, and ultimately we can yield what that final head count number is. And so this graphic, in combination with some of the more granular views, could give us a really good overview of how the sales manager team is shifting over the course of a year.
So Alex, can I chime in on offer
Yeah.
something here? So that's one of my favorite charts to describe a compact story. Of course, with HRIS transactions, there is one more column that you're missing.
Yeah.
And it's the most entertaining column, which is net other. And that's all of the other wacky things that happen inside of a company.
Sure.
Temp to perm conversions, going on and off leave. So the numbers will never ticket tie perfectly.
Oh, yeah,
Just with
absolutely.
known transactions. So you always need that little slack, that kind of other. And then when you show it to an executive, the first question they say is, what's that? And it really is that question.
That
How do you
catch-all.
cleanly, and it turns into the distraction, right? Is it, the rest of your story is fantastic, and all they want to talk about is, wait, you mean we deal with people coming on and off leave, and how do we like, and that then because it's like, oh no, stop.
Yeah.
So the reality of HRMS gets exposed very, very quickly. I love doing it. There's a smile on my face, but that's the stuff that I watch for in this particular area.
Exactly. And sometimes the trick there is to get ahead of it in a particular meeting. Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you how many times I've started with the numbers won't exactly match, but this is directionally correct. So I want us to focus on that story. Or sometimes just providing the access and not the specific numbers, so they can't start to do math and notice some of those strange nuances. But we could use this graphic as a way to paint a more robust picture. So I'm going to give you one more example here today, and we'll imagine that I was giving a quick update. So welcome everyone. Today I'd like to give you an understanding of our sales manager headcount and hopefully start to get us thinking in the direction of how we might rethink our strategy for hiring. I thought we'd start out today with a big picture update of how the sales manager role has changed. We'll specifically look at that headcount breakdown from the past year, going from January all the way to December. Now we'll start with the beginning of the year, talk about additions. This includes external hires, promotions, transfers in. And we'll talk about those deductions or people that have left the sales manager role, mostly transfers out, voluntary exits, and involuntary as well. And that will ultimately yield us to the final headcount of the year. So if we start with the beginning of the year, we had approximately 317 sales managers. Now, context that is important to note, and many of you do know this, is that our sales organization has grown pretty rapidly in the last year. So we actually have a pretty strong need to increase this headcount, and we've been working hard towards doing this. Now, typically our strategy has always been to hire externally in. So when we started to grow this team, it's not surprising to see that 2/3 of the additions largely came from external hires. And that remaining third came from internal promotions into that role as well as transfers in. So keep those numbers in mind, because we also had people leave the team, had about 111 transfers out. One thing I will have you notice is that 111 transfers out is actually more than the combination of promotions and transfers in. We also had approximately 200 people exit the role, also more than we were able to hire in. All of that yields us slightly below where we started this year at 298. So it's a little bit of disappointing news and not exactly where we wanted to be. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into each of these, as I think it'll help us start to rethink our strategy so we can turn this negative trend around. So let's start first by focusing on the additions. And I want to break this down by month over the past year. So it'll look like this, where we have the number of managers, and we'll break it down on a monthly cadence along that horizontal axis. Now, as I layer in the number of hires, that's this line that we see here, you'll notice that there's this quarterly cadence. It actually has a lot more to do with how we function as an organization, some of the sales targets, and when we do our onboarding programs, which is why we tend to see more starts at the start of the quarter. You will notice that the first 3 quarters is higher than that 4th quarter there. And that is simply because at the end of the year, it's actually when we do our promotional cycle. So as I layer in that trend, you're going to see this massive spike. So we have an annual promotional cycle that happens October of every single year. It's incredibly busy time for a lot of folks in the organization, which is why you tend to see that the number of external hires tends to come down. It's also worth noting for completeness that we have some transfers in, tends to be lower, follows a similar pattern as we saw with that quarterly cadence. So just keep all of this in mind as we shift towards those deductions next. So those transfers out and those exits. And again, we'll still look at the number of managers, so that total headcount, as well as the monthly breakdown. Now this time when I cycle through this graph, I'm going to layer in each line transfers out as well as exits. And we'll look at both of these together just because they follow a really similar path. I want you to notice that of all of these exits, they primarily tend to happen during 2 months, the start of the year and then in November. Think back to that promotional cycle that happens once a year in October. Why do you think we're having so many exits in November and at the beginning of the year?
They didn't get promoted.
Yeah. People that wanted to get promoted weren't getting it. And they're starting to realize that they would have to stick on for an entire year to be up for promotion again. So that's where we see that giant exit in November and January. So with this in mind, let's go back to the big picture. So our goal is to increase our headcount at the end of the year. We're already doing a great job recruiting and bringing in external hires, but where we could improve is through retention, reducing the amount of deductions. So it's my recommendation that we start to increase our efforts to really hire from within the organization. There are likely a number of ways that we could do this. We could start fast tracking internal transfers into those sales manager roles. We could consider adding a second annual promotional cycle in April. So for those that missed it in October, they don't have to wait an entire year, and that might convince them to stay on. I strongly recommend we think about doing this. Or we might also introduce an approval process for off-cycle promotion. So we're not just beholden to that one monthly option. And I'm sure you have ideas as well as how we could start to increase that headcount. So I'd like to use the rest of our time here together today to start to brainstorm how we might do that. And then I might shift into my meeting where I start to serve as more of a facilitation role and other people start to chime in with their ideas based on the data. And that really is the goal of communicating with data. It's not about getting the receiving end, the people in the audience, to necessarily adopt your way of thinking, but it's about getting them to understand the data so that they can start to have smarter conversations, ask better questions, and ultimately you have served them with the information that they need to start to add value to the organization. That should be the goal. If you're ever wondering, was my time well spent? Did I do this successfully? Pay attention to what happens after you communicate. Questions, thoughts?
How was the performance? I mean, we lost some people. Yeah, I mean, so we
Yeah.
had like 300 something in the start of the year
Yeah.
and we went down to 290. How was the performance? Because, usually that matters rather than sometimes, maybe we have better people now. The exits, they were the ones low performers.
Certainly it's a smart question. So one of the roles at storytelling with data is that we go into clients, we take their existing reports and we improve them in a clear manner. So I don't always have the specific context behind the scenario, but that would be a valid question that somebody would likely ask in that meeting. And that's where you would have to be able to, provide that context. But sometimes what we do as analysts is we just push so much information out at our audience where we start adding all of those things that we looked at during the exploratory analysis and we overwhelm them and we never get to the big picture or the decision that we need to make. So I highly recommend when you're thinking about presenting, keep it short and concise up front. Let your audience start to ask you questions. And that's when you can start to pull in the additional pieces that you understand and lend that context. Good one.
Hi, I have another question. So in my job, I deal a lot with, I do the same report with updated numbers to the same audience. And usually the audience, even though it's the same person, the same stakeholder, they don't remember what we talked about last time.
Yes.
And they also don't have time to look at the presentation from last time, even though like several times that was sent. So how do you deal, and like also you don't want to overwhelm the slide, but like, oh, last month we talked about this or that. So how do you deal with repetition and like having to repeat yourself, but not too much?
It can feel hard on your part where you feel like you're being overly repetitive, but we have to remember that for our audiences, they don't live in our day-to-day. So you'll notice even with the first sort of bump story that I gave you, I started off by just acknowledging the elephant in the room and I mock pretended, some of you aren't familiar, so we'll take a quick moment just to provide you a little context. I don't think there's anything wrong with providing enough background information for your audience to understand the new insights that you're going to get across. So oftentimes when I recommend structuring a business presentation, there are three main components to any sort of basic story. There's the plot, there's the climax, and then there's the sort of the call to action. Think of the plot more so as the critical context or the background information that you need to get. So maybe it's quick update on where we were last month, and then you can transition into where you are this month. So it might feel repetitive on your end, but for your audience, they only looked at it 30 days ago and probably haven't given it any sort of thought. And if you're finding that your audience isn't remembering what you're sharing, sometimes maybe it means you're giving them too much at once. And so you want to scale back and just focus on if they only take away one thing from your update, what would that be? And try to work from there. Good question.
Any other questions?
All right, so these books are for you. So I think because people asked thoughtful questions, I will give it to the people that asked the most questions. So you'll get a copy of our newest book.
Thank you so much.
There's
Dog hear it.
You asked a very good question at the end. Which one do you prefer?
Thank you. I already have that one.
I think that was the right answer.
Does anyone want a copy of the latest hardback version? All right, you're the only hand. We're not gonna duke it out. Did you want a copy?
It's okay.
Thank
you very much.
All right. So just remember the next time you communicate data, do not let your tool decide the decisions for you. This is one of the most important parts of analytics. If you think about it, your audience is probably never going to see all of the exploratory analysis, the hard work that you did. So the communication piece is the part that decides, was all that work worth it or not? Are you successful? And so spend time on the communication piece. Don't just hastily create some graphs, throw it in a slide, and hope that it resonates with your audience.
Thank you so much for a masterclass in storytelling with data. We really appreciate you coming. You came up from Pennsylvania. You're flying out in shortly to your.
Charlottesville.
Yeah, so like, and you're flying from New York. I want me to move over here. Hi, thank you so much for
Yeah, thank you.
doing this and relaying all the cool stuff and getting to do it on the 10th anniversary of
I know, right?
storytelling with David. So you should know that Cole posted a few hours ago about the 10th anniversary on LinkedIn. You were sharing before that you're not a huge fan of social. So I commented during the presentation that we got to celebrate the 10-year anniversary
Nice.
with you here with a shot of you doing this
Awesome.
as well live. So we got to be part of the 10-year celebration as well of that book and influencing everyone. So thanks for letting us
Awesome.
share a part of your story.
Yeah, thank you so much.
As well too.
And for anyone that wants more of this, wants to learn more, as you mentioned, Cole did a live event today. The recording is on YouTube, and she talks through the 10 most common sort of principles of good data communication that still are true from the 10 years ago when she first wrote that book. So sort of an interesting one and has a bunch of different graphs and examples that you can learn from. So certainly check that out. It'll be on the YouTube channel Storytelling with Data, so pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you.
And thank you everyone for coming out. You know, like it's just not good weather to be here. So we really do appreciate it. Thank you, NYU, for hosting us as well too. I think we'll be we have the room just for a few more minutes but I'm sure people also want to start getting out in the rain and stuff too. Very appreciated. We'll be around for a few minutes. Thanks again and have a great night and see you online.
Yeah.